I've been an entrepreneur, I think, since I could pretty much remember anything that I wanted to be. Back when you still filled in those little exam things when you were in high school and you said what your career path was going to be, I was writing down that sort of thing, and people would look at me a little bit strangely and say, don't you want to do something real? Don't you want to actually have like a normal career? But that never really made sense to me. I knew I always wanted to start something. I always wanted to be involved in something new. And I've had the good fortune to be able to work on a lot of interesting problems over the course of my career. Everything ranging from high-speed internet access, selling cars, helping people find childcare online. But my big turn really came back in May of 2011. I was going to do a pitch session for what I thought was going to be my exciting new social commerce startup when the folks that I was talking to really turned the conversation around completely. I thought they were going to invest in my company, and they convinced me to abandon what I was working on and come help them out instead. And that ended up being essentially attached to a rocket for the next 18 months. We founded what would ultimately become one of the fastest growing organizations in history, from $0 to $1 billion in less than a year, touching the life of every American, and I think to some level, pretty much the life of everyone in the world. I'm referring to the president's re-election campaign in 2012. It was an amazing experience, as I said, but mostly to get to learn from the best grassroots organizers and the best thinkers on the subject of why people give and why people get involved in their communities. As an internet guy, that wasn't really something I'd worried about a lot. I was mostly interested in why people would buy things. But seeing those two things come together is really an amazing experience. And at the end of it, you have this very surreal moment. The president comes to headquarters, he walks around, he gives you a hug. You hear speech about legacy and about the future, and then you're fired. This isn't a surprise, it's exactly what you signed up for when you got into this thing to begin with, but it's one of those after-stroke moments. It's one of those things that makes you think a little bit and say, okay, but I can't go back to doing what I was doing before after having been a part of something like this. And so a bunch of us got together and said, well, these problems that we've been seeing, these really feel familiar. We don't think this is unique to people that are running for office. We think that these apply to a lot of other things that are going on in the world, and in particular, to the crisis that's really facing the nonprofit community. You may not know that the nonprofit community is in crisis, at least more so than usual. You probably hear that a lot, but it is at a particularly acute stage at this moment in time. It's a $1.5 trillion industry. Half of that support comes from the government. At all levels, the federal government, state government, local government. Those of us in Illinois know that that's very much at risk at the moment, already starting to go away. That's going to happen in other states, and it's going to continue to happen at the federal level. So what's going to make up for that? About a quarter of that total funding comes from individuals. Americans are the most generous people in the world. It's something we've got a lot to be proud of, but it hasn't really changed much over time. The bottom graph shows giving as a percentage of GDP over the last 40 years. The good news is it's almost completely inelastic. It doesn't matter if we're in boom or we're in recession or what's going on. People give more or less the same amount. The bad news is they give more or less the same amount. And unless you believe that the problems in the world are going to fix themselves or that there's a better way to solve these problems, that has to change, especially in order to make up for what's going to be going away. It's kind of amazing that this should happen, especially given this sort of catalyst which is all around us. People are more connected to information than they've ever been before. You've seen a lot of it today. It's in your pocket all the time. It's in your Facebook stream. It's in your Twitter. It's everywhere around the internet. You can find out about all the things that are going on in the world. You can find out about crises around the corner, and you can find out about crises around the world. And people respond to these things. They share them. They look at them. They see them all the time. But given that, and given that we live in the presence of probably the most generous generation that we've yet seen, it's kind of remarkable that giving is inflexible. And what I mean by the most generous generation is millennials. It's the largest living generation, and millennials are also the folks who brought us organic food. They brought us fair trade. They brought us corporate social responsibility. They were the ones who humbled the largest corporation in the world, Apple, and made them rethink their sourcing practices in order to be able to be more fair to their workers in all sorts of different far-flung localities around the world. So given that this is the case, we've got the catalyst, we've got the people, and we've got the fuel. Why is giving so inelastic? One answer you often hear, college debt, poor job market, all of this was true, but all of this is starting to change. The oldest millennials are definitely getting into positions of power, they definitely have those resources, and they definitely have that desire. So again, why is giving stagnant? And in order to understand that, I think it's important to start by thinking a little bit about the history of why people give. The handsome gentleman in the bowler hat is Andrew Carnegie, and he represents about 200 years of American history. When people gave to nonprofits and they gave to causes, they gave out of responsibility or they gave out of duty. They gave because they were engaging in commercial activities all day long, and this was almost a way for them to give back. It was a way for them to feel okay about what they were doing and making profits. That started to change really in the 1980s and 1990s. You probably started to hear terms like venture philanthropy. Folks really looking at different ways of analyzing organizations and saying, okay, it's one thing to give in order to give, but aren't we giving in order to see some results? Aren't we giving in order to understand how organizations are doing as stewards of the resources that we give them? And a number of ideas came out. The first one was the idea of measuring organizations based on their overhead. How much money are they spending on executive salaries? How much money are they spending on benefits? How much money are they spending on marketing? How much money are they spending on raising money? I mean, if you could identify those things and you could put them to one side, you could figure out how efficient an organization is, right? You could figure out whether or not they'd be good to give to. Answer is absolutely not. There's a lot of wonderful research on this. I particularly recommend Dan Pallotta's book Uncharitable. But at the end of it, what you end up discovering is that if you measure organizations this way, they end up in what is called the nonprofit starvation cycle. No innovation, no new talent, no ability to expand, no ability to build capacity, and ultimate failure. The letter on the left comes from three prominent organizations: BBB, Charity Navigator, and GuideStar. All three of them are in the business of telling people the information that they should want in order to be able to make giving decisions. One of them in particular, Charity Navigator, was in the business, and to some degree still is, of rating charities based on overhead. But all of them said, this isn't right. We want to back away from that. There has to be better ways to look at what an organization is doing. So the next big idea, impact. So instead of trying to look at overhead, let's just say we can take the amount that they take in and we can look at the amount that they put out, and we can take a ratio between those things and we get efficiency. And that should tell us what we need to know in order to make good giving decisions. I like this infographic because it looks like hundreds or even thousands that you'll find if you just do a Google search, where they're just full of numbers, they're full of information, and the numbers and the information don't actually say anything because people don't actually give in that way. Impact is something which certainly has a place, and it certainly has a place in the way that folks can try to look at improving their organizations and trying to make them better and more efficient. But it doesn't capture fundamentally why it is that you would connect that picture of a forest fire and say, I want to do something about it. And you can see that in kind of broad terms here. You hear about something like the refugee crisis in Europe today. The image on the left from Mercy Corps looks like a bunch of restroom signs with a little bit of data stuck underneath it. It does tell you very important things about a crisis, a major crisis that's going on all around us. But there's nothing about that that's going to create an emotional response that's going to get you interested and excited about what they're doing. When you look at the picture on the right, and I tried to keep this at least a little bit optimistic, there's certainly many worse images than that. When I look at that, I see my 3-year-old boys. I see a couple of kids that had no influence on how they got into that situation, who are just the victim of circumstances. Or sometimes I look at that picture and I see my grandfather, who escaped from a similar war-torn situation in Europe to find a better life in America, which is why I'm able to be on stage today. And if that kid doesn't get a chance like that, he's not going to have a grandson that's here talking at Cusp. And that's the sort of thing that gets people at least beginning that journey. So how do you get organizations to really be able to appeal to people kind of in that way? You would think the internet would have solved this problem by now. It's revolutionized every other part of the economy. We're talking about a sector which is 6% of GDP. And so far, the answer is a big fail. If you look at the way that the solutions that have so far been presented work, they fit in one of two categories. Andrew Carnegie giving. We're just going to try to make it more efficient to be able to ask people. We're going to make it a little more efficient for you to use your credit card and get your bonus miles. But we're not actually going to change anything about the way that you interact with the cause. The other solution is gimmicks. It's either social giving, crowdfunding, celebrity gimmicks, or the search for the elusive viral social campaign. And these are not only not terribly effective, they're in many cases actually counterproductive. And what I mean by that is that less than 1% of giving actually happens as a result of a direct social ask. This also makes sense if you think about it. If I have a friend who lives in New York and is running the marathon and asks me to support a cat shelter, I'll probably throw in $20 or $100 or something like that to support my friend. I live in Chicago, I'm a dog guy, what do I care? I'm not going to support them next year or the year after. So it doesn't create any sort of long-term relationship between people and organizations. The other ones are even more bizarre. After something like the Ice Bucket Challenge, every boardroom and every nonprofit in America, they're being asked, how do we find this free money? How do we find these 9-figure windfalls? And what can we do to create the next thing that's just like that? And dozens and dozens and dozens of copycats get launched, and guess what? None of them work. Because the only thing we know absolutely about viral social phenomena is that they're unrepeatable. They're absolutely unique, and they can't ever be done again, at least not in the same way. But it's not all gloom and doom. There are bright spots. There are organizations that have started to unlock a new way of thinking about donors that looks more like what we did at the campaign, are inventing some new ground as well. These are 3 examples: Charity Water, Donors Choose, Kiva, all in totally different sectors of the nonprofit community. Clean water, micro-lending, helping teachers in their classrooms. But they all have a few things that are common in the way that they started to crack the code, and I think that they are really starting to show a different path. The first thing that they've really learned, which is different and unique, is that they aren't just in the business of asking people for money. They're in the business of taking all of these negative emotions, anger, frustration, empathy at a situation, in addition to resources like time and money, and really making awareness, making connectedness, giving people the opportunity to give back. All of these things that, with a little hat tip to Nick Marks, are the things that almost all happiness research shows are the things that fundamentally make people feel happy, feel good, feel rewarded, and feel excited about what it is that they're a part of. And to the degree that these organizations can be a part of that, then they can be part of something which is much bigger than just asking people for money. So another question is, how do they do it? The answer is some of it is a little bit trivial. It's a little bit just kind of packaging, but a lot of it is a lot more profound. The first piece, the packaging piece, is a piece about just saying, can we break down the problem? Can we make this into much more of a thing that you can get your hands around? Something which is big enough that it's a challenge, but small enough that I feel like I can make a difference. Now, if somebody's trying to raise an open-ended amount in order to support some catastrophe halfway around the world, I can't help with that. But if you're trying to raise a couple of $1,000s in order to be able to build a well in a village to supply them with clean water, and by the way, you can see that village, and you can see it on a Google map, and we're going to send you updates about it and photos about it, and you're going to see the people that were affected, you can get your head around that. Or if you can give $50 to help these guys in the middle who want to start their own farm and become self-sustaining and have their own business. Again, you're connected. You can see this person. You can look them in the eye, and you can understand what it is that they need. Or even on the far right, you get the opportunity to see a classroom, in this particular case, a poverty-stricken part of the state of New Jersey, help some women get started in science. It doesn't cost very much. It's very easy to do. But that packaging is only a very small part of it. The much bigger piece is about really looking at this as a basis of engagement. Instead of thinking about two camps, on the one hand, we have staff and our kind of full-time volunteer corps and the people that are actually working on what it is that we do. And on the other side, we have supporters. And their job is to give us money so that we can do what it is that we do, but we're two separate things. And instead, they start thinking about them as one group. It's really a continuum. How do you start through that entire process, starting at the beginning, leveling up, continuing to become more involved, and to the point that you cannot even tell the difference necessarily between a supporter and a volunteer and a staff member. And if you walked into a campaign field office, you would not have been able to tell who is staff and who is volunteer. And there are a number of different reasons for that, but they all come back to this idea of a ladder or a matrix of engagement. How do you start to create different ways for people to get involved that are not at the extremes of like us on Facebook, which is really not much, give us money, which is a lot, or actually quit your job and come work for us, which is really a lot. But how do you create a lot of other things that are in the middle that not only help you, but also bind people more closely to the organization? And I think the key thing is to learn there are three words that make up one phrase, which is thank you. It's never thank you. It's always thank you and. There's always another thing that you can do and another way to get involved. And this isn't a distraction, and it isn't something that people respond negatively to. In fact, they get really excited. When somebody gives, what they want more than anything is for you to say, why did you give? Tell us your story. Share that with us. We want to appreciate that too. We want to be part of your giving story. Then we want to share that. We want to help you share that. We want to help you talk about it. We want to invite a friend over and talk about it with them. Have them come see what we're doing. Come hang out. Do something like that. Maybe volunteer, maybe do an open house. Can't do anything else. Maybe just bring over some cookies for the people who are volunteering, if that's something which is something that you can manage to do. But whatever it is, it's about creating an entire cycle. It's about creating different ways to get started. If you go to that charity water page, you'll see things not just like give money, it's like get your hair cut for clean water, or have a party for clean water. But there are all these different things that you can do and all sorts of different ways to engage so that people can always pick the thing that's the lowest bar, that's the next easiest thing to do. And that's a frame that all these organizations have chosen, and something that really does allow you to become part of a greater whole. But in order to do that, you don't necessarily need to be a big web-based organization with a huge advertising budget and Madison Avenue companies all vying to create your website. There are a lot of other different ways that you can start to structure these things as well. So this is Open Books. They're a small nonprofit organization. They're located right here in Chicago. You can go over to the West Loop and take a look at their beautiful bookstore. They collect books to support literacy programs all over the city. They have about 100-to-1 volunteer to staff ratio, and part of the reason that they're able to do it is by creating an entire ladder of engagement. The handsome guy in the lower right there, his name is Tim. He's the managing director of the organization, but he didn't start that way, and he didn't come from a different organization. He came to them through an entire ladder of engagement himself. He started as a shopper, became intrigued by what he saw, started talking to some of the staff in the store, got more intrigued by what he was finding out, decided to become a reading buddy, started working with a kid in the school system, and then ultimately joined the associate board and became the managing director. And it's not a unique case there. If you talk to the staff, virtually all of them rose to the ranks in a situation that was similar to that. And they've created, because of that, sort of greater family that spreads throughout the area. People have their weddings in the bookstore. People are coming back there for their photos. People are sending their kids in order to be able to become a part of it. It's become something that has actually become a part of people's lives, even when they aren't necessarily a recipient of the service that Open Books provides. And that's really kind of a key point. Nonprofit has always been this sort of exclusionary term. It's been about the thing that you're not, and it's really more of a tax status. But what it's always traditionally represented is a case where the folks that are actually providing your support and the folks that are actually benefiting from your product are different. In a for-profit company, they're always the same. You have this really nice feedback loop between the customer and yourself trying to figure that out. But in a nonprofit, you don't. They're always distinct. And what these organizations have learned is how to start to blur that distinction and bring those two things closer together so that the supporters actually really have a stake in what it is that they're doing. And that creates a really powerful kind of engagement. But it isn't entirely on the organizations to be able to figure this out. They do have to retool, they do have to figure out how to better engage. But as a society, we also do have to figure out how to be better supporters. And there are really a variety of pieces that come into that. And part of that is really picking your causes and knowing about them. It's not that information isn't valuable, and when I was talking about impact and when I was talking about overhead, I wasn't trying to say that data should be just thrown out the window. But it is something that, unless you're willing to take the time to really assimilate, it's not necessarily going to be that helpful in your individual decisions. But if you are interested in that, and if it is a cause that you've learned to care about, then you can start to understand that nuance, and you can really start to get engaged in that. It can become a real thing. And so kind of along those lines, it's about concentrating your efforts, focusing on the things that you care about, so that when you are moved and when you are in that moment, you can make those really great decisions. And getting to know the organizations, being open to those other kinds of asks, and getting more involved, and really kind of becoming part of that civic community again. And then ultimately creating regular support. And this is another key thing. I think a lot of folks just assume that people that work at these organizations can manage to do so entirely out of their love for what they do, and that's definitely important. But they do have rent to pay, and they do have gas to buy and groceries to buy and all those other things. And if you're unable to plan capacity as an organization, then you're unable to respond when things get bad. So being able to support them regularly is not only is sometimes easier for you to plan, but it makes it a great deal easier for them and actually more efficient for them to be able to provide the services that they're working on all the time. And the last one is don't respond to the gimmicks, because the gimmicks are just making it worse. If you're really giving out of your heart to the things that you care about, the entire process can become incredibly effective and incredibly rewarding. But when you're giving on the off chance that you might get entered into some event in order to get a picture taken with a celebrity, it's probably not actually helping the problem, at least not very much. The most important thing, though, is to know what matters to you and to share that back to the organizations. If you do that, they can try to tell you about that. They can try to connect with that. They can try to present that and really make that a little bit easier on them, knowing what you care about, as opposed to them staring at this big spreadsheet of impact and trying to figure out what might be important to you. So the organizations can do things, the donors can do things, but we still have that same challenge back at the beginning. The problems are all around us, and we can see them everywhere, but there's no thing that brings that together. The internet still hasn't solved it. And this is the kind of problem that we're thinking about at Public Good all the time. And I'm glad to say a lot of other social entrepreneurs are really thinking about it as well. And this kind of gets back to the entire theme of the conference that we're at, connecting the unconnected. How do you provide an alternative when somebody's looking at something, a piece of content, news story, and are in that moment and they are moved, to not leave them in a situation where all they're going to feel is frustration, where you're asking somebody to click that little thumbs up button on something which is a disaster. You don't like a murder or a hurricane or a disease outbreak or something like that. And that turns out to be true. Less than 18% as much sharing is done of hard news and media stories than is done of soft news and entertainment. And it's partly kind of an unintentional consequence of that word. And also the kind of whole idea of social. So one of the things we've been working on is an alternative. Take action, do something. Let's provide you with some alternatives. Let's start to get you connected. I'm hoping at some point that lightning bolt becomes as familiar as the little thumbs up. But in the meantime, I'm glad to say a lot of other folks are working on bright spots as well. So the more that we can take these lessons to heart, create fuller engagement, really get people behind the organizations that they care about, and find all different ways to engage that go beyond just how many hours do you have to give and how many dollars do you have to give, we're going to be able to create really the rich environment, the real civic network that we need to be able to create as a society in order to make up for the problems that we have that are getting worse all the time. So take action. It's a little piece. I hope you'll see a lot more of those. Thank you for your time today, and I hope that through design we can find other and better ways to give.